Greetings everyone, this is Billy Cultist today, and today we're gonna begin working on the jungle scene from scratch. Now this jungle was something that was requested by a viewer, and I thought it was a good suggestion, so we're gonna go ahead with it now. We're gonna be formatting this approach to this jungle a little differently than my past winter scene video format was. As has been stated before, we here at the Cult have currently issues with the storage space on personal computers and devices, which leaves us in a position where we don't really want to end up making 3-4 hour videos. But we've also discovered that 3 or 4 hour videos is exactly what I tend to get when I make these scenes from scratch. And so going forward with this jungle, I intend a new approach. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna break it up such that I'm gonna deal with the creation of certain sets of assets we're gonna need to comprise the scene, like all little important props like rocks and foliage and trees and bushes, and I'm going to go over the creation of those things individually in what will hopefully be shorter, more bite-sized videos. And then what we'll do for a finale is we'll go in and we'll set up the whole scene and unify all of it together. So in a way, basically what I'm going to do is reverse the process and lead off by making all the little bits and bobs and finish with the general base level, or scene. Also, quick apologies in advance if there's sound interference in the background, you know, people moving around, or Jimmy's PS4 Pro. We do our best with these videos, but it is what it is at the end of the day. We do our best with what we got for now. Oh, one more thing of note before we get going. It's with great interest that I have to say that I am now going to be working on a PS5 going forward. A good IRL friend of the cult has been generous enough to gift me a PS5 after hearing the cult's plight, and I'd like to say that I'm very thankful, and that it will probably help very much going forward. Now, this generous donor will remain anonymous for reasons, but again, they are very gracious. As far as how this is going to affect these videos going forward, I'm still going to approach modeling techniques and optimization techniques the same way as I would on a regular PS4 or PS4 Pro. So don't worry, just because I'm currently using a PS5 to show you how to do this does not mean it should not be possible to do this on a PS4 or Pro. So with that out of the way, let's get into the business of the day, and that's going to be modeling some of the plants we're gonna need for our jungle's understory. This would be like ferns and palm kind of fern plant, I don't know, little plants that you find on the ground that kind of cover the ground, not the trees, they're low below the canopy, little things like that. I think what we'll shoot for is do about 3. I think about 3 is a good number. I got some ideas for what I'm going to probably use the most, but we're going to start off by making a really basic ground-hugging fern, as you might see in a rainforest. So of course, first things first, we're going to open our menu, go to modes, and we're going to pop into old sculpt mode. And as you can see, we got our basic cube ready to go. Now my approach with these tiny little plants is going to be to make single-piece sculpts for each one of them. Now that's not to say this is the only way you have available to go about this, but it is the way I'm choosing to use for this particular scene for optimizational reasons. And later on near the end of the video when we get this finished, I will explain that in more depth, my reasoning behind this. And I'll also touch on some of the other options you might have for doing the same exact thing, just different methods. But for now, let's get into our guides and such very quick, and I'm going to quickly turn on the grid snap, and I'm going to set a mirror basis. I'm going to turn on the mirror tool, but I'm going to set a mirror basis, and I'm going to shrink this cube way down. Eventually I'm going to delete this cube, but I'm going to stamp it for now to set up a mirror, basically. But now my plan is to turn back off the grid snap, and to turn back off the mirror. Later we'll be turning the mirror back on, you'll see, but for now we're going to run it off. Now I'm going to get into really making this fern, so I'm going to go up to my shapes, and I'm going to head over to the curve tool. Let's select that. And currently it's on stamp. For me, I'm going to want it on smear for this, so I'm going to do a quick simultaneous L1 triangle and turn it over to smear. Another little thing that I'd like to mention really quickly, some portions of this sculpting process in real time are going to be quite tedious and long. So what we're probably going to do is I'm going to go and demonstrate my initial technique just to show you and give you an idea of exactly how I'm doing what I'm doing. And then if it's going to be a case of basically long, tedious repetition of that process, I'm just going to time-lapse from there. I'll speed up the footage a bit, or rather Marty, our editor, will do that, so that hopefully this video's not ridiculously long and boring. Anyway though, let's get down to this fern. First thing off, I'm gonna shrink this down. We're gonna make a nice little curving, arcing stem. Now you could do this by putting this back in stamp with L1 triangle, like so, and then if you hit L1 square, you go into this little mode, where you could grab these arrows, like so, And you could pull these points of the curve out and around, and you could get it's a very nice, smooth kind of a curve. And it can be very uniform. You can taper it if you want to, like a little bit at the end there by dragging that thing in and out. Or the other end, there's another one of those control points right there. And that can get you a very smooth, precise kind of a curve. And oftentimes when I'm doing my thing, especially if I'm working on organic stuff like plants or what have you, I like to go for a more organic approach and just draw out the curve myself. So basically we're just going to do that. I'm going to get in here real quick and reset this. Make sure it is back on smear and shrink it down. And we're just going to smear out a nice curve. Very organically and loosely, in the fashion of an artist. Another thing that I'd like to point out, get it real quick to the L1 square shape editor setting, is that I often like to use this varying looseness thing up here. It's very helpful for optimization purposes and maintaining detail on objects. But for these particular objects, we probably are not going to end up using it, and I'll go into a little more detail on why as we go along. But for now, we're just going to start drawing out our little fern stems, I guess is what that'd be called. Anyway, there's one. Kind of rough and rugged, but that's what I like. Got a pretty nice arc to it, looking nice and curvy. And now I'm just gonna hit circle and X, it's a tool. And from here on, we're just gonna basically use this, and I'm gonna adjust it a little bit, the angle, because we're basically going to be doing the topmost branches, leaves, stems of the fern first. You know, if you've ever seen a fern, you know, they fluff up at the top, and then there's more extending branches going down to the ground underneath. Let's adjust that angle just a little higher, just a touch. And it's a little bit slanted here, so I don't know, it just doesn't matter. It is nature after all, but we're just gonna kind of align it so. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that out, L1, R2 simultaneously to clone, and I'm going to dupe it out one more time. We're going to have 3 at the top level. And what I'm looking for here is I want a kind of a nice, kind of a roughly equidistant triangle kind of pattern going on up here from overhead. I'm going to go align them and make sure the angle's nice and high for this top layer. It's a little bit falling down, I think, here and there. Okay, so there's our top layer stems in place, and now what we're going to want to do is we're going to go ahead and start to get the leaves into place. And this is where it could be kind of tedious as we go forward with this whole plant. Again, I'm probably just going to show the process for setting up one stem and leaves, and then just going to time-lapse through the rest. Anyway, though, let's get into that, and let's get into our shapes again. And I'm going to take a cylinder for this, and I'm going to shape edit this with L1 square, and I'm going to drag this. We're going to kind of about that thick, so much. I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to section it in half, like so, and we're going to turn up this whole setting to about, oh, so much. That's about right, I guess. And then we'll take this, I'm going to flatten this out, like so, kind of, so there's a little sort of a curve there. And maybe I'll stretch it out a bit more, like that. That's pretty good. Maybe a little more. That's pretty good. Now I'm going to pull back out of the shape editor. We got our custom shape right there. And I'm going to take a moment now to go back to what we were talking about before with what I was saying about using the varying looseness and why I'm not entirely going to do that on this particular project right here, even though typically I tend to like to do that. Now the reason behind that is when you turn on the varying looseness and you got a very long, thin object like we got here, kind of, it'll tend to degrade the object such that you'll get these icky nasty holes in it. So if you're trying to sculpt some very thin surface, it's generally not a good idea to use the very looseness. And I'll demonstrate and get back into the shape editor and turn it on briefly to show you. Now I'm going to turn on the very looseness, and we're not getting it too bad with this particular shape. It's still big enough and thick enough that it's not really affected too bad, but we're going to have to shrink it down because this is going to be the leaves to our fern. Here we go into the shape editor. I'm going to stretch it out. You see that? You see how that's what'll happen, basically. If it's too stretched, too thin, varying looseness is going to kind of tear these big, nasty holes in it. And the only way I know of to get rid of that is to either thicken the object quite a bit. Yeah, even that's not actually helping that much. Or to just go ahead and turn off varying looseness. Anyway, though, we're going to take this back to where it was, about there. We actually weren't having too much trouble with the varying looseness on this. It's not really leaving massive gaps in it from my perspective here. So I'll actually just walk right back over what I said before and say, yeah, I will actually use the very looseness on these leaves, unless we run into some kind of future problems. So let's get back out of our shape editor, and I'm going to make sure, well, it's still a sphere. I'm going to turn it to stamp. I'm just going to kind of angle this thing so it's kind of coming off the stem. We don't have to be perfect or really fancy or anything, just kind of coming off the stem like so. Then we're just going to stamp one down, and that's it. That's our fern leaf, and that's going to be our template going forward. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to grab this shape and clone it, like so, and we're going to move it up along this curve of our stem and kind of align it as we need it to be, like so. And when we got it in a place where we want it, I'll try to take it all the way to the end and see if this works. This might not work, and I might have to go in sections. But anyhow, what we're going to try to do now is clone out a whole bunch, and to add clones, we just hit the left directional button while we're still holding onto this thing and keeping it grabbed. We get a big line of clones like you see here. And we could take it and move it around. We could kind of use the stick and adjust the angle there that we're getting, so that they follow it much nicer. I may add just one more level of clones, or even two more. And this is going to make your thermo bump up when you release the button and let these things be stamped. But for the moment, there's no reason to worry about that. In the future, we are going to be optimizing and reducing the detail on these quite a bit. So whatever numbers you're getting on the graphics thermo while you make this thing, it doesn't matter. We just want to focus on building the thing and getting the shape right. So I'm going to release that. And we're going to have our nice array of clones, and there we got a 2+ on the thermo. We're up to 4 graphics memory already. Nothing to be worried about. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this bottom one here, and we're going to clone it out again. And we are just going to arrange a similar setup on the other end. And we will just bring it out along just like we did on that side, kind of arrange it like so. And I'm just going to clone it and do basically the exact same thing I did on the other end. And there, voila, we got our leaves along our stem. Very nice. Now you may be thinking to yourself at this point, yeah, that part up front, Billy, it looks kind of weird for a fern. And you are right about that. We need a nice kind of taper to these leaves because there may be a plant that does this, okay? I am certainly not a botanist by any stretch of the imagination, just an artist. But typically when I think of a fern, I think of a nice kind of taper towards the end of the stem and the leaves or whatever. Not this kind of weird cutoff we got going on here. So we're going to have to fix that real quick. And to do that, we're going to use negative shapes. We're going to get into our shapes, and I'm going to get a cylinder again. And we're going to try this out. Let's shape edit it real quick here. Have it, put a hole in it. We're going to leave it kind of thick there. I'm going to kind of stretch it out a little bit. See how that goes. I'm going to press triangle and turn it to subtract mode. So it's a negative shape. And we're going to bring it up here to our edge like so and see if we can't get a nice taper on that. Well, looks like a pretty nice taper, so I'm going to lay it down like so, just a stamp. And we got this part on the outside here. And we're just going to manually clean that up like so, going along and just kind of stamping on the way out. And voila, we got a nice kind of a taper to our leaf and stem array here. And we'll basically just go through and do the exact same thing on the other side. And voila, our leaf is in great shape. And now all I have to do is basically do the exact same process with these other two. And then when we move on down to doing the layer below. But we're going to go ahead and time-lapse straight through to that now. Okay, so we got the top layer of leaves on our fern in place now. And you may notice a few artifacts where here, we went through with the negative shape and it affected the adjoining leaf. Like here, we kind of got that going on, over here, and so forth. But I'm here to tell you not to worry about that, because we are working with nature, and nature is very often flawed and not perfectly geometrical and pristine and perfect. And when we reduce the detail, it's probably going to be marginally visible, if at all. So now what we're going to do is go down and do the leaves at the lower level below these leaves, and these leaves are going to be kind of splaying out more widely, and there's probably going to be more of them. And at this point, I'm probably going to go ahead and get into my options with square and go up to guides, and I'm going to turn back on the mirror probably. And that just because that way I could just do something on this end and it'll basically happen on the other end. And that's basically going to mean I'm going to have to redo the entire process of making it, drawing out a stem and applied leaf or making a leaf for it. Because if you try to duplicate these out, they were not made during mirror active, and so they're not going to be affected by the mirror. But I think it'll save time for me overall, so I'm going to try it. So let's go ahead and we'll pop open our nice little curve tool, and we will set that to smear. And put it on add. Now we got that, let's try and see if we can smear out a nice arc of a stem like we did before. Okay, that's decent. Not perfect, but it's decent. It'll suit my needs. So we'll just grab those, and you can see the mirror is active on the other side. So what we're doing on one side, we're basically getting done on the other. And we're going to just kind of align them such that, I think so that they basically come out the open ends here where there's not leaves on top. And we'll dupe that once. And we'll try it on the other side, see how it looks. I don't know if this is going to work out so good or not. And that maybe looks a little bit off balance, weird, kind of bizarre. But I don't know, it might not be too bad for the purposes I need it. Because ultimately I want to have things look pretty varied in my jungle scene. And having things a little off kilter on one end of an object means I could just kind of turn it around different angles and it'll look like a variant of an object, even though it's just the same object. Like from one angle it looks like this, and then from another angle it looks like that, and then that. So I think we'll just go with that. Anywho, now I'm just going to time-lapse through the process of setting up leaves on these things and getting it all trimmed out and looking nice. So something I'm going to note real quick here before I continue is up here we use this kind of cylindrical negative shape to do these and have a nice taper. I'm going to probably go for something a little more precise, which may leave us in the end with a rougher curve, but in here we've got a lot of over-connection and overlap going on, and I don't want to get too much distortion going on if using a negative shape. So basically this time around I'm going to get in here and I'm going to use a negative cheese wedge. I don't know what's going on there. Oh yeah, it's too far away. Our thermal's probably gone up quite a bit. I'm going to take a quick look at that in the eye here, thermometer, and yeah, it's up to 12. But that's nothing to worry about right now. Like I said, we're not to the part yet where we're going to reduce the detail, but that will come. So now I'm just going to negatize our cheese wedge here. We're just going to kind of make a curve our own way here along the outside like that. And as you can see, we might be getting a little rougher of a curve, but you can be a little more precise with this cheese wedge, especially when it comes to places like this, where it's going to overlap with another leaf and maybe cause some distortions. So let's just keep going with this. And get it in down there like so, and have it touch. Then just clean up this junk. Then we'll just do the same on the other end. I'm just going to kind of time-lapse through this. And there we go, we've kind of got the makings of a nice fern. Now I think I am going to end up adding myself a third and final layer to this, but we're just about almost done with this particular little plant. The process we're going to use for making the third and final layer is going to be not very much different at all from what we did for the top two. And I'll probably maybe downscale the leaves on the lower layer a bit. I may not use the mirror, but we'll just time-lapse as I make the lower layer here real quick. Okay, now that's all done. It looks like we pretty much, at least in form and shape anyway, have ourselves a very nice fern. I'm gonna go and scope into it really quick here and delete this little cube which we set up initially to set the mirror, because we don't need that anymore at this point. Now, if you were a fastidious man, there's a few more things you might do to detail this up a bit. I don't know that it would really matter after you actually got to the point where you degrade the detail, as I'm going to do for optimization purposes. But for instance, if you really wanted to, you could say cheat this cheese wedge, and you could kind of go in, edit it, let's say thin it down a little bit like that, and you could go along all these, you know, and kind of put a taper on them like so, you know, give it a little more, you know, a little more love and care there like that. And of course that's very tedious, and I doubt when you reduce the detail as far as I'm going to, it's really going to be that noticeable. But you know, it's really up to you what you're going for. One last thing I'm probably going to do, I'm going to probably put a little kind of a bulbous thing on the end here just to kind of give it something to connect by to the ground or whatever surface it's on. We're going to turn up the blend amount on that just a touch so it will connect nice and sort of smooth. Stamp that in there and kind of, maybe I'll put a little bit of variation around the bottom there. It's not that big a deal. Anyway though, some kind of little anchor point going on there just so we know when it's touching the ground or, like I said, whatever surface it's attached to. But I would say sculpture wise, we do have our fern. Now, as you may be thinking in your mind, the fern is kind of a weird fleshy pink color. So what we need to do next is think about painting this thing. And when we started this sculpture, we could have gone in and actually chosen a color to start off and sculpted the whole thing in like a color like, say, this green or whatever you want. That's really the choice of the artist. That's up to you how you like to do your workflow. I tend to just sculpt the thing in the base color, get the form down first, and then I'll spray paint it later. But, you know, like I said, entirely up to you. So we're gonna go in and we're gonna get the spray paint tool, and we're gonna make sure we got a nice spherical brush there. We're gonna go back to the tools, and let's make sure we get a better color. That green is way too electric or whatever. We definitely need something more foresty. That's a lot closer to what I think I want. Alright, I may go in and mess with it just a little more in the color picker and just bring it over here a little touch to the darker gray side, just a bit, like so. I think that's probably gonna work. I'm just gonna bring this, blow it up real big. We're just gonna envelop our entire sculpt, and we're just gonna splash that down. And we got the basic color for our fern. Now, another thing I like to do is go in and add, I think on this simple of a sculpt, we'll put some kind of fake highlight and shadow on it. So what I mean by that is, first I'm going to go into my guides so that we snap to surface so that our brush will basically hug the surface of whatever. Shrink our brush down so it's kind of, I don't know, so big. Probably about that big. Then I'm just going to get on our colors, and we're going to take the color picker and we're going to raise this up in the brightness area towards white just a little bit there, like about there. Let's see how that looks. Okay, that's pretty good. Something like that. And I'm going to get into the options for the brush, you know, L1 square, and we got these options. We got opacity, we'll turn that down just a touch. We got blend amount, I'm going to turn that up quite a bit. So we get a nice soft gradation of that. And I might shrink it down just a touch more. I'm just going to take and smear that. Actually, let's reverse that. Brush is still a touch too big, so we're going to shrink it down a little bit and try that again. And yeah, that's kind of what I'm going for. We're going to kind of lighten up along the center stem. And that gives you kind of this nice visual effect where the leaves are kind of darker on the outside. I don't know. It looks nice. That's all I know. It looks nice. So I'm just going to kind of go about doing that to all the leaves. I'll just time lapse through that as we go about that. Okay, that's good. One last thing I'm probably going to paint. I may go through it, put in a darker kind of a hue. It's kind of go for a little artificial shadow going on kind of some places, like in the center there and maybe under some of the leaves, and I'll just kind of time-lapse as I do that real quick. Anyway, though, there's our fern. Now what we got to do next is we got to work on knocking down that turbo. Now we're going to jump out of sculpt mode, and we're going to get on our tools, and we're going to head over here to the detail adjuster and select that, and we're going to get into this mode. And currently it's telling us the object is blue, and in this mode, blue generally means it's a low level of detail. However, the only reason it's telling us it's blue and a low level of detail is because it's currently the only object in the scene. This thing operates comparatively. It compares whatever to whatever else. So yes, currently this is the lowest detail object in the scene because it's the only object in the scene. But we know for a fact it's not actually that low a detail because 16% on graphics memory is not low detail. We want to knock it down to about 1 or 2% at most for this object. So we're going to make sure we have it on reduce, and then we're going to press it down and press it down and press it down. And there we go. We got it down to a nice, on the graphics thermo, a nice 1%. And that is exactly the level of detail and graphics memory that we're looking for with something like this. It's a small decorational object. There's probably going to be a lot of instances in our scene. We don't want this thing blowing up graphics, and we don't want it blowing up gameplay. So we're shooting for that nice 1%. Now we're gonna get out of the detail mode with circle here. And as you can see, she's still looking pretty good as a fern. Now the noticeable difference appears when you get up close to it, but ideally, we're making some kind of cool adventure, combat, whatever game that happens in a jungle, and not Fern Inspector the game. So this level of detail should work fine. A few more final steps I'm going to go get in my modes. I'm going to get on my style mode real quick and flex, and I would like to add a circle as the general fleck because I feel like it's more naturalistic that way. Additionally, I'm going to get in here to the coat mode. We're going to go to our finishes, and I'm going to kind of apply a little shiny wax to this just to give it more of a leafy kind of look with the light. And that's about a good place for it to be. Not too much shine or too much waxiness, but just enough kind of, you know, subsurface transparency or whatever you call it going through there, make it look kind of more like the leaves. It's very nice because if you run up the shine and the wax too much, it's going to be too glistening, and the wax too high is going to make it look too flat. We're not going to get nice dark areas where we need shadow. So we've got kind of a nice in-between going on here. I'm just going to raise this up a touch so we got our little nub right in the grid center there. And now one other thing we're going to do with our ferns, we're going to hold L1 square, and we're going to pop up the tweak menu really quick, and we're going to go over here to the physical properties. And for this object, the shape is relatively complex. There's going to be a lot of them, and it's a small object in our scene, presumably. So I'm going to turn the collidability completely off, because we don't need to have puppets colliding and bopping all over something like this while trying to walk around. Another thing we don't need is imp interaction, and I'm just going to turn the physics cost low. Again, I don't really know if that actually helps that much with optimization. I just tend to do it. Whatever. That's something I do. You may not have to do that. Another thing I do, and I kind of recommend, is to go in here to the labels. If you're making some kind of general environmental asset, and you got a logician working on your game, making all the gameplay logic and stuff, which basically in my situation, Jimmy tends to do most of that. But he tends to say it's very helpful if you go ahead and label this as scenery. So that's something I'm going to do, and I've kind of soft recommendation on that. It really depends. You know, speak with your logician or whoever's doing the game logic. If it's you, you know, make up your own mind about whether you want that on or not. But Jimmy seems to find it helpful when he has to use these props to put them into an actual game with gameplay and stuff. So that's our fern out of the way. I'm going to kind of move it over to the side here just a touch. And there's two more basic jungle understory plants I think I want to get to. And basically the process behind them is going to be quite similar to the fern. So we're going to set up our next plant, get into sculpt mode. I'm going to set this curve up. We're going to just draw some quick stems to this beauty. And I'm going to time lapse through that really quick. Now for this particular plant, we're going to approach the leaves in a little different way than we did for the fern. Now this plant, I don't know what this is called, and it's probably a little messed up from what it actually is in looks. But yeah, I saw something like this in a picture of a jungle, so now I'm making it. But we're going to go ahead and get in our shapes, and for this I'm going to take a circle, or excuse me, more of a sphere, and we're going to flatten this out. And well, actually first I'm going to halve it in half, and then we're going to do this, thin it out a little bit, like that, put a hole in it. Then I'm going to flatten it out like so, about so. Maybe go ahead and increase the hole just a bit there. And there we got it. Let's see if this is on. I'm going to make sure that's not on. Oh, and I'm going to want to make sure that this surface snap is off. That'll end up making you a lot of problems if you leave it on. And I find often when I'm working, it tends to be the thing that does end up getting left on by accident. So I tend to want to go through and check it just to make sure it's off. And my soft recommendation would be to do the same. But maybe you don't have a problem remembering to turn off the surface snap. I don't know what it is about surface snap, but it just tends to be the thing that gets left on when it shouldn't be. So now I'm sizing this up a bit, and I may actually stretch it just a bit more. Like so. Just a little bit more, about like that. Bring it down to about there, and stamp it out. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open this up. We're going to get out a cylinder. I'm going to take it off smear. We're going to turn it subtract. Then we're going to go ahead and kind of make it real thin, like so. About that, maybe. We might change it a little bit. Then I'm going to take that, and we're just going to go along here towards the center, kind of. Angle it so. And I'm just going to kind of radially apply this all the way around by cloning it out, and we'll kind of time-lapse through as I do that. Okay, so there we got our basic leaf. And again, I have no idea what this plant is actually called. I have no idea what the actual plant I'm basing it on is called. Just looks like something you'd see in the jungle. And if we wanted to get a little fancy with this, we could go ahead and get in here and take a sphere on negative. And we can kind of squish it down just a touch there, maybe like about that. Then kind of scale it up sort of like so, and then kind of put that right underneath the bottom there, and you can kind of... I can kind of get like a kind of a taper going on, because this leaf's pretty thick. But, you know, that's not too big a deal. And again, if we were real detail hounds, we could probably go in and individually cut these things down a bit. But I'm going to end up making all these leaves basically this way, and I'm not going to want to go through that. I think this is good enough for my purposes. If you're a detail hound, you know, feel free. It's going to take you several hours of work, but, you know, sometimes art is work and definite tedium. But whatever it takes for you to get the look you're after. Anyhow, this is going to do for my purposes, and I'm basically going to just use cloning to repeat this process across all of these things. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and take the liberty of time-lapsing through all of that real quick. Okay, so pretty much there is whatever that thing is, jungle plant number 2. And you could probably see how this would be quite tedious, going through and doing that same operation all the time, all the way around. But sometimes that's what it takes. Anyway, we got it, and it's in a pretty good spot as far as I'm concerned. I like it. Now all that remains is to paint it. We're going to follow a sort of a similar pattern to how I painted the fern. And we're just going to quickly paint this. I will probably time-lapse through the painting process, as it's not really going to be that much different from the fern. Okay, one last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put like a little lump again, kind of down on the end of it, just to delineate where it meets the ground or whatever surface it's touching. Okay, there we go. We got our little lump thing. I'm just going to adjust it here so it's a little bit higher, more like where I actually want it sitting on the ground. And I'm probably going to approach it similarly as far as coat mode and also style mode, so I'm just going to do that quickly. And of course, again, the thermal's gone way up to 9%, so we're going to knock that down really quick to probably 2%. Get into detail adjust, and as you can see in detail adjust, it's pretty red because compared to that thing, it's way over. So we'll just knock that down very quickly until we get a blue coloration. And now it's kind of showing this thing as red. That's just because it has to make up its mind. It's basically just deciding, well, this thing's just a micrometer more detailed than this thing. It doesn't really matter. We're fine. Our thermometer is down to 2% graphics, which is where I'd want it for 2 sculptures. 1% apiece. So now we're going to exit detail mode, and I'm probably going to just open the tweak menu as a final thing and set up the settings and things in the tweak menu the same as I did for the fern. So it doesn't collide and it doesn't take too much physics cost, and we got our nice little scenery label on it. And I would say that thing is in as good a place as I think I need it to be. So now I'd say it's time for us to move on to our third and final jungle understory little bush, plant, shrub, whatever you want to call it thing. And I think this one might end up being the easiest one of the bunch. And that'll probably be because the leaves are going to be pretty simple compared to this stuff where we had all these little individual leaflet parts sticking out on both the fern and whatever this thing is. Let's just go ahead and open up the sculpt mode again, and this time I'm going to go with a sphere. We're going to actually open up the sphere settings and we're going to quarter it right down like that. And I am going to put the hole in it, thin it up. And we're going to stretch this thing out just a bit like so. And there we go. We got that looking nice. And as you can see, that's going to kind of be the basis of our leaves this time. And it's much simpler than the other leaves. Now I'm going to go in here and make sure surface snap is off. And I'm going to turn off precise move because it's not too handy when I'm doing natural things, I find. And we're just going to start stamping these down around our kind of a central stem area. I'm not even actually going to draw a stem, because I think I'll be able to do this without it. And there's going to be so many of these, you probably wouldn't be able to see the stem anyhow. Like I said, it's a pretty simple plant. So I'm just going to time-lapse through as I set up the build of whatever this thing kind of looks like. Now I'm actually going to do something a little different. I'm going to go through and paint this now, paint these green, because I'm going to want to do another kind of more different and bright color here at the top. I'm going to kind of make a bulbous
kind of flower, fruit slash whatever at the top popping out. But first we're going to want this bottom part green so we don't get problems with integrating the colors. So I'm going to go through a time lapse of that real quick, the painting process. Something I think I want to do with this particular plant is I want to have a kind of yellowy tips on the end of these leaves. I don't know, that kind of seems like something I should do. So now I've got that thing fully spray painted as far as the leaves go, and I'm going to go ahead and work on that bulbous fruit thing on top. We've got, as you can see, kind of a sphere stretched and a fat quarter here, and it's got the same color as the tips of the leaves at first. I'm going to kind of gradate into a kind of an actual orangey red color. And I'm going to kind of change the color. We'll have it kind of gradate into a yellowy kind of pinky color, I don't know, something like that. And there we go, and we'll just go ahead and get back into the paint tool, and I will paint a little bit more blush red or whatever on that and kind of finish it up. Okay, again, I have no idea what this thing is, but it looks like it belongs in a jungle setting. So that thing looks nice and done, and it was simpler than the other two. So one last thing I'm going to do, of course, is I'm going to go real quick and put our little bulbous end on it so that we kind of know where it touches the base. But other than that, it is pretty well complete. Now I'm going to go ahead and put our style settings and our finish on. Now it's got kind of a nice finish, just like our other two plants. Now we'll jump into detail mode and we'll reduce it down because we can see it's quite red. We're going to shoot for about 3% thermal, that's what we should get. And we were actually able to knock it down to around 2%, so that's just fine with me. It's looking pretty good. We'll get back out and see how it looks. Looks okay to me. I don't need super high levels of detail for such things as these. And last but not least, we'll just get the settings tweaked to where they ought to be, where I like to have them for these tiny small bushes of the jungle understory. And that's about it. I would say all 3 understory plants are ready for service whenever we get the entire scene ready to be formulated. One last thing I want to do is I want to really briefly go back and touch on something I brought up near the start of the video, and that was why I did these as entire sculpts instead of maybe splitting them up into compound sculptures, or even using paint to accomplish some of these effects, which is also possible. I mentioned back when I brought this up that it was for optimization purposes. Now the thing about approaching this from a standpoint of compound sculpts, there are some pros and there are some cons to that. Now 2 of the pros are number 1, speed, and number 2, detail. Let's take this fern for instance. If I was to compound sculpt this, I would have made an individual fern leaf, put a lot of tender loving care into it, and then just duplicated out that fern leaf and made like an entire fern out of a bunch of clones of the fern leaf. And because it was just one leaf, I could maintain a really high level of detail on that one leaf, and the whole fern overall would look much more detailed than this. And additionally, visual effects wise, you could do some really cool things that you can't do with this. For instance, if it's made out of individual clones, the whole fern of different leaves, you could actually take the trouble to go in and, set up a timeline with animation and like animate the wind rustling through each leaf. That'd be really cool looking. The downside to this method arises when basically you're trying to make a game with more gameplay and a bunch of logic crowded your scene. Now it's great for a walking simulator, but if you want to have a scene where there's a lot of stuff happening, like gameplay-wise, like, I don't know, explosions going off, sword fights, I don't know, action, you know what I'm saying? You're going to need a lot of free space for all the gameplay that's probably going to put in your scene. And when you've got an individual fern that is basically a grouped object and it's a ton of individual leaves, we've got a lot of leaves here. We got what? Well, about 10 leaves here on this thing. And like I said before, in a jungle, a fern's going to pop up quite a bit. There's going to be quite a few instances of a fern. And basically, as I've said before, in Dreams, when you clone stuff, it's kind to your graphics thermo, but over time, with more cloned instances, you start to have a lot of demand on your gameplay memory. So if you're filling up a jungle with ferns that themselves are groups of individual leaves, you're going to be blowing up your gameplay thermo pretty quickly, and you're not going to have room for all that cool stuff to be happening in your scene. You're just going to be able to have like a walking simulator or something, roughly. And basically, when I create for games, I'm thinking of games where there's a lot of stuff happening. I generally don't think of developing a walking simulator. Although I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Sometimes it's very nice to just walk through a beautiful scene and look at the beautiful visuals and experience, the ambience of nature or whatever, It's very nice. But to my mind, I get the impression most people are probably thinking of making something not like that. You're probably thinking of making some kind of cool game where there's like action and stuff going on. And for that kind of game in Dreams, you're just going to have to approach it with a little less on the visuals and a little more on optimization of gameplay space. So the compound object method for making a plant like this is kind of out the window on that. That's my suggestion. If you find a way to pull that off, all the better for you. But personally, I would just stick with this method for something that's going to be more gameplay heavy as a scene. Of course, the downside to this method is it does entail a lot more tedium when building these things. And like I said, you lose detail, but it's more optimal. So what about paint, you might think? Why couldn't I make such a thing out of paint? Is that possible, Billy? Paint's not super heavy on the thermo, is it? And paint can kind of move around a bit. You could kind of turn on some like wave settings or visual effects, and you could kind of get like a rustle through the paint fern. And the answer to that is yes, but there are actually two downsides to paint that I can think of off the top of my head as well. A number one problem with paint is that it actually does not cast shadows. As you can see, these are sculpts, so they cast shadows. Paint does not do that. And shadows and lighting go a long way in making something that might be kind of low detail, like this, look way better when it's unified into a full scene. Now, one way you might be able to get around that would be to make the leaves and stuff out of paint like you imagined, and then actually put like a rough invisible object that's set to cast shadows but be invisible underneath. Although I could imagine that process being very, very finicky, but I think if you wanted to take the time, you could probably somehow arrive at something that would work. However, in that case, you're still basically resorting to a sculpture again, combined with a painting. It's just invisible. Another problem paintings tend to present is if there's a whole lot of them in the scene, and especially if they're more complex, you're going to start experiencing problems with overdraw, and that can affect your optimization and frame rate and all that kind of stuff, especially on like a PS4 or whatever. So it's definitely something you want to strive to avoid if you're going to have, like I said, a more frantic gameplay kind of game that's not just, like a walking simulator again or something. So frankly, my soft suggestion for paintings would basically be, I would not use it for like medium, small, understory bushes or shrubs or whatever, plants like this. Now, I would use paint if I was going for like the grass or the moss or, the little tiny clovers or random sprigs of little leaves here and there or something like that. Some very tiny and a lot of it around the surface, very close surface of the ground, something like that. But things of this size, probably not with the painting. I mean, again, at the end of the day, it really all depends on just exactly what you're trying to achieve, just exactly what you want as an artist or whatever, creator. And you're just going to have to weigh it all for yourself in your own mind and figure out just exactly what you want to do, what's going to work best for your situation. But I have laid out on the table some things for you to think about while doing that. So, I hope that will be of help to you. And with that all being said, I believe we have basically come to the end of our rope as far as this session of creation is concerned. These assets that I've made today here are going to be remixable. I'm going to make them remixable so you can pop in and grab them and use them yourself. Something to note is they've all been made in one scene, so basically they're going to come out as one big grouped object when you stamp them. So if you use this and stamp it into another scene, you're going to probably want to ungroup all of them, so that you can move them around individually or delete the ones you don't need for that scene in particular or whatever, But there'll be a link in the description put there by Marty to tell you just exactly what to search to find these in Dream Shaping, if you want to use them. And next time we come back, we'll be making some other set of little assets that we'll be using to unify our jungle in the end. I say little, but maybe it'll be trees or rocks or something like that in the next video. And definitely leave a comment and let me know how you like this new format. Is it better than the other format? Personally, I feel a lot better with this format myself. I have a hard time focusing over long periods of time after the hours drag on. My brain turns to mush. With this format, I'm a lot more focused, I feel like, and I can get things done as they need to be done step by step. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments if you have any. Also, if you have any special suggestions for maybe props to make to stick into our jungle in the end, suggest those as well. But that's about it for today. I sure hope the video was helpful, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll be coming back for more. If it was good, definitely leave me a like and a subscription to our channel, and maybe even think about checking out the support links in the description. Then go to our Coffee and Art Pal.
We realize not everybody could make monetary contributions to supporting us, but if you can, it's definitely highly appreciated. It helps to keep us doing this stuff for longer.
You can also keep an eye out on our coffee page, even if you can't donate, because Marty will post updates on games coming out that Jimmy's working on. Jimmy's pretty much always working on some kind of game, so we always got something coming down the chute. And Marty will post little updates on the coffee from time to time about those things. I think currently Savvy Seal 3 is in the works. So if you enjoyed the other Savvy Seal adventures, that ought to be fun when it drops.
But aside from all that, have a great day. This has been Billy Cultist. Goodbye.